Well, everyone, it's almost time. The desperate showdown for the fate of the Bleach universe is about to begin. At the time of recording, Bleach episode 24, Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know, is mere days away. And it promises the start of the epic battle between the Zero Division and Yhwach's elite Quincy warriors, the Schutzstaffel. And I am very excited. This is a big deal for a few reasons. Narratively, of course, it is the ultimate capstone to the cour, a regal battle of divine proportions featuring some of the strongest fighters in Bleach. It's the culmination of everything we as fans have been waiting to see since the first moment we learned that Aizen intended to invade Ryokyu and kill the Soul King all those years ago. But it's also a big deal because of all the crazy moments in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. This is really what the entire story was building towards. And in many ways, the destined showdown was a huge disappointment. The very idea of the mythical Zero Division in a battle against an unstoppable, blasphemous foe who trampled the holy ground of the palace was something I used to dream of seeing back in the day. So when the time finally came at the tail end of the second Quincy invasion for the assault on the palace to take place, perhaps expectations were always going to be too high. However, when what took place was a one-sided stomping followed by another yet different one-sided stomping over in fewer chapters than I can count on my hand, it was a real letdown. Of course, that's not to say the battle is all bad, and there is plenty of good to be found here, which is partly why I want to see it succeed so much here in the anime, including many of the creative, ridiculous abilities you'd expect characters of this caliber to wield. But as far as scenarios that need expanding upon, or just downright changing altogether in the anime, this has always been right near the top. In fact, in a video I released before the first episode of the 1000-Year Blood War dropped, exploring 13 changes I wanted to see the anime make, an expanded fight between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel was number 2, right behind a flashback to the war from 1,000 years ago. And considering the anime has already sort of delivered on my number 1 pick right back in the first cour, this has now jumped up to that coveted top spot. But what went wrong with this showdown exactly? How is it that a battle destined to be such a slam dunk that should have been so good turned into a muted fumbling at best? The showdown between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel is a perfect lesson in the difference between build-up and payoff, and how one really shouldn't exist without the other. Also, what can the anime do to fix this fight, if anything? Let's take a look. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, when you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, I do have a Patreon as well. And by supporting me over on Patreon, you can get your name in the credits of every video and get videos ad-free as well. And as always, an enormous shout out goes out to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you all so very much for the support. And of course, there will be spoilers for upcoming content in the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime in this video to come. So let's begin by addressing the main question in the title of this video. Why was the fight so disappointing? To understand that, we first need to look at the characters involved. The Zero Division is an enigmatic, secretive part of the Soul Society, barely affiliated with them at all. Instead, they guard the equally reclusive Soul King deep within the royal realm. It's a charge of the highest order. Without the Soul King, all worlds in Bleach will cease to exist. For years, the Zero Division and Ryo too were some of Bleach's biggest mysteries. I've detailed it before, but we heard word of them only a couple of times in the story prior to their first appearance in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, most recently in terms of chapters in Turn Back the Pendulum, when Kyoraku confirmed the existence of a Zero Division or the Royal Guard to none other than Aizen himself, after the most recent captain of the 12th Division, Kiryu Hikifune, was promoted. But after that, all was quiet for a very long time, until the final arc came over the horizon. Kubo knew people were excited to finally meet these lauded characters. He himself mentioned in an interview before the arc released that he was finally going to allow them to appear, and when the characters made their debut at last in chapter 516, one of the very first things we were told about them was that together, despite them being a mere 5 captains, their strength was greater than that of the entire Gotei 13 combined. If that doesn't set expectations, I don't know what does. But it didn't stop there. It quickly became apparent that these were characters who were positively dripping with the very history of the Soul Society itself, and whose skills were so far unmatched. Tenjiro was able to instantly restrain Soifon, completely blindsiding the head of the Omnitz Kiddo with his speed, while Senjumaru was capable of breaking into Mayuri's lab and stealing Tensa Zangetsu right from under his nose without so much as batting an eyelash. It certainly seemed, with grandiose titles like God of the Sword being thrown around, that these characters would put up one hell of a fight should anyone ever dare desecrate the palace without an invitation. So, when it finally came for their time to shine, there was every reason to expect a true spectacle. Except when battle actually breaks out, not only are the Zero Division defeated fairly swiftly, but they're beaten without even really fighting back. Their defeat is so total and embarrassing that it happens completely off-screen, an afterthought. The Zero Division's many tricks and traps buy them time at the beginning of the assault, and it's this build-up that actually works quite well, helping to set a suitable stage for the main event. But when the chips are down and the supposed real fight begins, it's over really before we even get to see it. Years of expectation and hype, both built up by the community, but also narratively within Bleach itself, are completely tossed aside. Their defeat is so bad that it genuinely doesn't feel befitting of the characters that at that time we had come to know. But the issue doesn't just lie with the Zero Division either. It's during this battle that we get to meet the villains who will stay with us now until the very end of Bleach. The Schutzstaffel, Yhwach's own version of the Royal Guard, the holiest of God's angels, who get the privilege of being brought up to the palace to be by His Majesty's side when he ascends to the throne. Except that, like the Zero Division, the Schutzstaffel are also immediately destroyed, systematically one by one, along with their initial credibility as antagonists. Really, the only reason people look at these Quincy's favourably is that they just got lucky in the end, as their boss is capable of reviving them all, giving them another shot at a decent showcase later on down the line. I say down the line because even after they're revived here, we don't get to see them fight against the Zero Division at all. The showdown for the Royal Palace unfolds in various stages, which I've always liked. It makes sense that there would be several lines of defence when protecting the linchpin of your very world's existence. So let's go through the individual stages of the assault on the Royal Palace, looking at both the good and the bad, before eventually detailing what the anime can do to maybe fix things moving forwards. I mentioned earlier that this battle is a perfect lesson in the difference between build-up and payoff, and how one really shouldn't exist without the other. And that's exactly the issue sitting at the core of this fight. The build-up here is very good. It's exciting, it's gradual, it feels like a natural crescendo as the Schutzstaffel swagger their way towards the Royal Palace, seemingly overcoming the first wave of Zero Division defense with ease, only to suddenly fall into a well-laid trap. It works well because you get to see everyone in action, each member of the Zero Division contributing something different to the setup. It feels like a battle plan that was actually thought out beforehand. The problem is that although the build-up is great, there's absolutely zero payoff to it all whatsoever. It's wholly unsatisfying to be invested in the defense of the palace when the outcome is completely skipped over. The assault on the Royal Palace lasts from chapter 587 to chapter 611, which sounds like a decent chunk of chapters. But the reality is quite different when you factor in both the Mayuri and Byakuya fights that cap off the battle in the Seirete. The assault starts well, however. I adore the imagery of Yhwach's Pillar of Reishi just obliterating the walkway to the royal palace, the way he slams his boot down upon the woodwork without a shred of respect for the Soul Society's holiest ground. The best thing about Yhwach as a villain was his no-nonsense, incredibly direct approach, the way he dirtied his own hands and wasn't afraid of being on the front line. That was why he got results. Immediately, in another cool scene, every member of the Zero Division senses the Quincy's arrival, and as Hashwolf summons a squadron of soldat from the shadows to invade the palace, Korinji Tenjiro is the first defender on the scene. Another thing I really like is the sense of progression throughout the invasion. I like that the villains are met on that initial walkway itself and have to fight their way through. The soldat rush forwards, only to be immediately swatted away by Tenjiro and his ore as he openly challenges Yhwach, promising to halt his advance. Although Yhwach is defiant, Tenjiro summons a tidal wave of surging water, bringing it crashing down upon the invaders. The water is boiling hot, incinerating many of the soldat in some really awesome scenes. There aren't many water users in Bleach, but of course this doesn't seem to be the ability of Tenjiro's Zanpakuto, merely a passive power that he controls. It's never really explained how he can manipulate water freely like this, but then all of the Zero Division members have power and control over things relating to their historical contribution to the Soul Society, so presumably these were gifts bestowed upon them by Reo. As the water churns around a seemingly captive Yhwach, Tenjiro leaps into the air and activates his Shikai with the command Heavenly Flash Kinpika, and we watch as the short blade atop the ore begins to glow incredibly brightly. So far, so good. It's early days for the battle, but things are promising right now. We're already getting our first Royal Guard Shikai reveal, and it seems like they're taking the threat seriously. Unfortunately, issues begin to arise as soon as the very next time we return to the Royal Palace. Although we see traces of Tenjiro's water spilling over the edge of the walkway, whatever fight he's been having has been totally skipped over. An ominous portent of things to come. The ability of his Zanpakuto, Kinpika, is never revealed, and his water has been dispelled. Yhwach merely strolls past Tenjiro as the Shinigami is unable to land a hit, completely bewildered by the fact his attacks seem to miss every single time. Alright, so that's a slightly disappointing conclusion to that first section of the invasion, but again, it's very early days, and things do improve from here. Yhwach's next obstacle appears before him, Shutara Senjumaru, flanked by a brand new type of soldier, the Royal Palace's Divine Soldiers. Senjumaru stands atop a flight of stairs at the end of the walkway, leading to the initial platform at the foot of the palace itself. There's a wonderful little sequence here that I do think is genuinely fantastic. Kubo makes a point of emphasizing Yhwach's insolence as the Quincy King defiantly takes a massive step forward onto the staircase, effectively spitting in Senjumaru's face as he walks on by unchallenged. He seems to think so little of the Zero Division's individual members that he doesn't even stop to look at them, simply sweeping beside Senjumaru. However, she's not going to let him by so easily and instructs the Divine Soldiers to launch their attack. As she promises to turn Yhwach into the rust on the Soul King's blade, Senjumaru is shocked to see none of the weapons land, instead bending unnaturally around the Quincy King. It's at this point that Yhwach's early trump card reveals himself. Sternritter W, the Wind Nyanzol Wyzol, rises from his master's shadow to do battle with Senjumaru. I've always thought this was really odd. Nyanzol was clearly able to use his power freely while in Yhwach's shadow, and that seems to have been their plan all along, so why expose himself? Nyanzol makes himself a target, and of course, ends up dead very quickly. Nyanzol being killed in a single chapter isn't a big deal, plenty of Sternritter have faced worse fates, and I like that Senjumaru's cold-blooded attack is both a show of her inherent skill and how seriously she's taking this. As Nyanzol hits the ground in a huge splatter of blood, we see what appears to be Senjumaru's passive power, the ability to manipulate fabrics. This turns out to be far more useful than we could have even imagined a little later on. However, with the first Sternritter down already, with Nyanzol out of the way, Senjumaru believes they'll now be able to strike Yhwach. However, he's not done yet. From his shadow, he summons another regiment of soldat who prepare to advance on the divine soldiers. I wish we'd seen even just a little bit of these two sides fighting, and I'm hoping the anime will show a few small clashes here and there. I honestly totally forget that these two sets of foot soldiers are even here half the time, and it helps to emphasise that yes, this is a full-scale invasion, and not just a few really powerful Quincy. Just like they did for the second invasion itself of the Seirete, showing clashes between Shinigami and Soldat, I kinda hope we get the same thing here. But that's not the only surprise Yhwach has up his sleeve. From the shadows rise several ominous new opponents. The Schutzstaffel, Yhwach's own personal guard of immensely powerful Sternritter. We've glimpsed them once before in the anime, in episode 14, when they oversee their majesty's announcement, but in the source material, this was our first ever introduction to them, and that's important too for later. They're immediately imposing, and they have mostly fantastic designs. Plus, grounding these new villains is Askin Naklavar, a familiar face revealed to have been promoted from the regular Sternritter to Yhwach's elite guard for the upcoming battle. Askin being among the group adds some levity to them, while also ensuring they're not all brand new characters the readers have no attachment to. With the appearance of the Schutzstaffel, we technically enter the next phase of the invasion. Gerard Valkyrie immediately leaps into the fray, drawing his sword and charging at Senjumaru. Senjumaru draws what I can only presume is her sealed Zanpakuto, a giant sewing needle, only for Gerard to instantly shatter it into pieces with his blade. Senjumaru calls into battle the second tier of the divine soldier known as Reo's Shield, a gigantic variation of the soldier who surrounds Senjumaru with enormous walls. Unfortunately, this new fellow doesn't get to do too much. They're instantly killed by Perna de Pankajaz, a strange hooded Quincy with a currently unknowable power. Speaking of which, surely the anime won't feature Perna's strange, tiny little hand, right? That's got to be a mistake that they will get rid of. But as Senjumaru looks on in concern at the fallen soldier's body crumpled and warped in midair, Lil Barrow removes his cloak, revealing an enormous, high-powered sniper rifle before he blasts a hole straight through Senjumaru's skull, killing her immediately. It's absolutely brutal, a great cliffhanger to an excellent chapter, and I don't think anyone believed she was dead for a second. Again, it was just far too early into the showdown for one of the Royal Guard to actually die. Believe me when I say we're still technically in the build-up stage of the fight. You'll see what I mean very shortly. With Senjumaru's death, the Schutzstaffel begin to grow complacent, scoffing at the Zero Division's lack of skill as they continue to barrel through their defences. Lifting his gun, Lil snipes all 5 of the Royal Guard cities out of the sky in a great visual, demonstrating his incredible power as the colossal plates collapse and fall in columns of smoke and fire behind him. With the royal palace seemingly shattered already, Lil bids his king to proceed. But Yhwach knows the truth. Suddenly, the ruse is lifted and the extent of Senjumaru's unbelievable power is revealed. Everything surrounding the Schutzstaffel's arrival so far has been totally fake. Living, breathing images depicted on fabric, presumably even the murdered Senjumaru herself, though how she was able to actually kill Nyanzol and interact with Gerard while being presumably just an image on cloth, I don't know. Perhaps the real Senjumaru was working her magic behind the curtain all along. It's at this point that the Zero Division trigger their trap. They've managed to lure the Schutzstaffel in along the walkway, and now they have them right where they want them. Senjumaru reveals that the real royal palace is in fact much farther away, being hidden from sight by Ichibei, who has disguised it thanks to a massive seal made of ink bearing the character for the word conceal. Again, this is slightly weird. This feels a little bit like Nyanzol revealing himself. Why would Senjumaru give away where the real royal palace is? They could have continued to fight the Schutzstaffel here, and the Quincy's have no idea where they were actually supposed to go. But as the real royal palace comes into view, the next phase of the trap activates. An enormous cage of trees sprouts around the landing platform, rising up above the Quincy's. In a really fantastic panel, very unique for Bleach, you never see anything like this otherwise, we see the remnants of Senjumaru's fabrics lifting up into the sky like a veil as Kiryu Hikifune reveals her part in this plot, creating this cage of life designed to imprison the Quincy's. This is exactly the kind of crazy visual I would expect from the Zero Division, and it doesn't disappoint. Hikifune reveals her passive ability, which is also ridiculous. The power, essentially, to manipulate life itself through her Reryoku, using her spiritual pressure to create ingredients that help bring new life into the world. She reveals that the cage itself feeds on reishi, so even though Leel's bullets do damage the cage, the tree trunks merely devour them, growing stronger once more. So hungry for reishi are the trees that they sprout branches in the gaps between the cage's bars to catch any wayward reishi. So the stage is set and every member of the Zero Division has had a role to play. Senjumaru created the elaborate fake scenario with which to lure in the Quincy's, Ichibei concealed the true Ryokyu from sight, while Hikifune crafted a massive impenetrable cage within which to keep the Schutzstaffel prisoners. It seems like only Tenjiro doesn't have a concrete role here, aside from being the first out the gate. As the resident healer, he probably is just meant to support them from the sidelines. But with the Quincy's trapped inside the cage, they find themselves at the mercy of the final member of the Zero Division, the #1 Zanpakuto creator, Uetsu Nimaya, who arrives with his imperfect blade Saya Fushi, challenging all 4 of the Schutzstaffel to battle at once. And so, finally, the build-up is over. It might have seemed like a lot, but in reality that's only about 4 chapters or so of material, and the real fight is finally here, as stated by Uetsu himself. These are now the flesh and blood members of the Zero Division, actively putting themselves and their lives on the line now the ruse is over. Like I said, the build-up to this actual fight is genuinely really good. It builds organically, and I think the way the Zero Division hatched their plan is clever and packed full of the unique, extraordinary imagery I'd associate with beings of their level. Colossal tree trunk cages, the floating cities revealed to be mere fabric, it's all here and it looks great. And with Uetsu promising a real Squad Zero battle, it looks like the party is just getting started. Except, no. Because this is where the showdown kind of goes completely off the rails, and it does so really quite quickly too. On the surface, Chapter 601 is undeniably badass. Uetsu, using his unstable experimental blade, effortlessly cuts down the Schutzstaffel one after the other. Gerard swings at him, but Uetsu simply drops him to his knees in a fountain of blood. Revealing his blade kills people in one hit, Uetsu splits Leel's bullets in half before doing the same to the Sternritter himself. Pernida prepares to attack, but Uetsu just launches his blade into the shadowy folds of the hood, and apparently that's enough to outright kill the Quincy. Meanwhile, Askin, the last one standing, is able to accurately gauge Uetsu's swing trajectory and leaps backwards, only sustaining a light wound. Uetsu commends him before immediately finishing him off by slashing his throat. I mean, it's pretty cool, right? Uetsu lives up to his name as God of the Sword, demonstrating some of the greatest swordplay we've ever seen in Bleach, using a really awesome Zanpakuto to boot. I particularly like his ruthless demeanour. The way he barely lets Askin finish his sentence before simply cutting his throat is very savvy for a character in this series and should absolutely be applauded. Unfortunately for Uetsu, however, Askin isn't dead yet. The only member of the Schutzstaffel to be newly promoted gets back to his feet and uses his Shrift to combat the Zero Division member in what's really the only decently balanced battle we get to see during all of this. For a single chapter, Askin tries to kill Uetsu with his powers, while Uetsu drains himself of blood while trying to cut the Sternritter. It's a great, if kind of random chapter, seemingly just created because Kubo liked Askin and wanted to show him off a bit, which I've got no problem with. However, it's all for naught, as Uetsu manages to put Askin down for good. While this is all initially great to see in the moment, this is where problems arise. These chapters create some issues, specifically for our villains. With the Sternritter as an organisation, the Thousand Year Blood War arc suffered from some glaring issues that were only becoming more apparent towards the end of the second invasion. That many of the Sternritter were only around for a few chapters at best before being killed off, and that a lot of the fights were turning into one-sided beatdowns. And in the space of this chapter alone, 601, both of those issues had just reared their heads again, as it seemed like all 4 of these promising villains had just been killed off instantly, like chumps. First impressions are vital, and although the Schutzstaffel talked a big game, although they would later go on to be very imposing villains worthy of being the final villains of the series, for their first impression they had all been sliced to pieces by a single member of the Zero Division who wasn't using bankai, or even shikai for that matter. No matter how you view it, it's a bad look for the supposed final villains of the series. Something had felt different about the Schutzstaffel from their first appearance in chapter 599. We kind of immediately expected good things out of these guys for how dangerous they seemed right off the bat, for how competent they seemed, competent being the operative word here. Yet they were all punked big time, and I remember being so disappointed with their showing, except no, they weren't. As Oetsu prepares to duel Yhwach himself, the Quincy King steps forward, activating his greatest trump card of all, Auswählen. By stripping the remaining Sternritter in the Seirete of their powers, and in some cases their lives, Yhwach is able to redistribute that pure power to his Schutzstaffel, reviving them all like a grand necromancer. Oetsu looks on in terror as the Quincy rise to their feet once more, blood dripping from their wounds, new angelic wings beating on their backs. Now, in theory, I actually quite like this. The idea that the clock is ticking for the Sternritter down below, and that their king is willing to drain them of life and power to feed his more valuable soldiers is a cool one, as is the visual of these deceased Schutzstaffel rising from the ground, blood coming out of their injuries with these massive angelic wings. That's all pretty awesome stuff. However, again, it comes with problems and new questions. For starters, did Yhwach just anticipate that his prized elite guard would just get annihilated immediately? He doesn't look surprised by it at all, and merely uses Auswählen like it's just a matter of fact. What if there were no Sternritter left down below to steal power from? What if they'd all been killed during the period of time when Yhwach was invading the palace? Think about it from an optics perspective. It's really strange that Yhwach seems to proudly introduce his royal guard, saying that they will be your opponents, only for each member to be killed in one hit, say for Askin, by a single member of the Zero Division. It's just weird. Then there are other problems too. When Leal blasts Oetsu, this time successfully, he claims that it is not additional power he has been given, but simply his true power that he didn't have the chance to use before. I mean, this raises even more questions. Firstly, why are the Schutzstaffel not just using their full power from the moment they invade the palace? And how does this even work? Yhwach would surely know they'd need everything at their disposal, so what's the point of this? Is he responsible for putting a lock on their powers? And if so, why bother? And on the flip side, if they are using their full power from the get-go, and as Leal states simply didn't get a chance to use it in battle yet, then why didn't Gerard's The Miracle activate when he died? Was Pernida really killed by a single sword strike when it can evolve continuously? And how was Leal shooting actual tangible bullets when his power allows him to simply destroy everything along the x-axis with prejudice? The only one of these I can kind of buy is Pernida, as during its main battle we see that the left arm of the Soul King has seemingly been sealed with chains that it then breaks out of, so maybe that's why it's unable to evolve. But the other two, I don't think there's any excuse. Unfortunately, this sequence in chapter 604 feels like a bit of a mess to me, and this whole scenario feels like a contrived excuse to get Yhwach to use the Auswählen. It's also possible this shift was introduced because Kubo felt he needed a viable reason as to how these Quincy could realistically stand up against the Zero Division, before deciding to later on go all in on turning them into fully fledged divine unkillable angels. I think, for me, a lot of the time, I just wish Bleach would do away with the tricks. I wish the Roid Lloyd twist wasn't a thing. It cheapens the ending of that fight. Wouldn't it be better if Yhwach simply killed Yamamoto with his own two hands after a genuinely difficult, brutal and bloody battle, but in the end the Quincy King simply overcomes the Captain Commander himself with his own raw strength? Wouldn't that also make Yhwach that much more terrifying? The same is true here. Why do the Schutzstaffel need to be revived? That whole sequence cheapens the showdown. Just make them strong enough to go toe-to-toe with the Zero Division from the start to avoid any unnecessary shenanigans. I don't mind them cheating, necessarily, they are the villains after all, but that whole sequence just doesn't seem to make sense. Is it new power or not? If it is, why is that even a thing? If it isn't, why didn't the Shrifts activate? But regardless, this is now when the true battle should begin. The real Zero Division are all assembled, and the Schutzstaffel are back on their feet and fully powered up. At this point, I was hoping for a cataclysmic showdown, where, with the tides turned, the Zero Division were really feeling the pressure, forced to use whatever means they could to try and resist. Again, things start off good. Leal shoots Oetsu once more, but both Tenjiro and Hikifune try to block the attack. However, now that Leal is using the X-axis properly, his shot simply goes right through their weapons and takes a chunk out of Oetsu's chest. As Tenjiro and Hikifune look on in shock, Leal prepares to fight them. The tension is palpable, the stakes are high, and this is the darkest and lowest moment. The villains are powerful indeed after all, and the Zero Division is firmly on the back foot. And, well, you don't see anything else. We have no idea how the Zero Division fought to try and defend the palace. By the next time we see them, they're all dead, lying crumpled in pools of blood on the ground. So hopefully you can see why this entire Royal Palace showdown feels so weird. Something just isn't right here. The build-up to the actual fight itself is effective, involving everyone to some degree, but when the moment comes for both sides to clash, Oetsu is the only member of the Zero Division to actually get involved, and he instantly wipes out the villains without breaking a sweat. So maybe they're not much of a threat after all. But actually, they're suddenly back on their feet. The Schutzstaffel's resurrection, and by extension their victory, feels unearned because of this. And rather than see an actual fight, or even rather than see the scenario just simply flipped, and Leal murdering all of the Zero Division one by one, this time we see even less. The Zero Division are just dead and gone, just like that. When the Vizard were the exciting new faction on the block, remember those days? We at least got to see them in action. In the Battle of Fake Karakura Town, we saw the Shikai of just about everyone that we still needed to see. Shinji, Rose, Love, Lisa, Hiyori, and we saw everyone's hollow masks as well. Here, despite the Zero Division not only being the new guys, but figures of legend that have been anticipated for a long time, we learn next to nothing about them or how they fight. While we might see Senjumaru and Hikifune's sealed weapons, they never really use them, and Tenjiro's Shikai goes unexplained despite being seen. It's ironic. The Zero Division were the ones we had waited years to see, but in the end it's the Schutzstaffel who gets some of the best fights this arc has to offer, while the Zero Division die quickly and off-screen without dignity or purpose. Now, it would be remiss of me not to bring up Ichibe's battle against Yhwach, which is truly tremendous and genuinely one of the best fights, not just in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but in the entirety of Bleach. It is a wonderful, titanic clash, filled with the kind of power and expertise you'd expect from the two leaders of their respective sides. I've said it before, it nearly reaches fan fiction levels of how insane it is to actually see the leader of the Zero Division taking on the resurrected Quincy King. This is the sort of thing that would have made me keel over 10, 15 years ago at the mere thought of. It seems clear to me that after spending so long in the Seirete portion of this invasion and building up this assault on the Royal Palace for a little while, Kubo was out of time, basically, and realised he had to decide. Does he show the Zero Division versus the Schutzstaffel, or does he give Ichibe, the leader of the Zero Division, a great fight to really showcase what he can do? And Kubo chose the latter. And honestly, because that fight is so good, I don't really mind. Ichibe literally shows us everything he can do, and it's absolutely wonderful. But the anime is coming at this with a new, unique opportunity to actually give us both. This is why so many fans want to see an extended version of the Zero Division versus Schutzstaffel fight. In my eyes, that means a proper look at the battle that should have begun in chapter 604, after the Schutzstaffel were reborn and the situation was at its most desperate. That's when we see everyone join in. Oetsu goes down, but Senjumaru arrives to aid Tenjiro and Hikifune, the three of them using their incredible powers. Maybe Senjumaru and Hikifune try and hold them off, while Tenjiro tries to heal Oetsu. And yes, maybe we even see their Zanpakuto in action. What you end up with, instead of an epic showdown, is a one-sided beatdown where nobody really gets to do anything, followed by another one-sided beatdown where we actually don't see anything at all. And all of that after the excellent work Kubo does building up the invasion itself, it totally stumbles at the final hurdle. So what can the anime do about it, if anything? The Thousand Year Blood War anime has, as I mentioned, a unique opportunity to fix this battle, just as it has with other fights and moments in the past, and it seems like a large chunk of the community is united in wanting to see this happen. Now, from my perspective, I don't want them to completely change the fight or its setup, nor do I think they need to, nor do I think they will. Considering the cour is likely to end with chapter 611, that's roughly 14 chapters of material to be split over 3 episodes. The final episode will likely be dedicated entirely to Ichibei vs Yhwach, as it should, but that leaves us 2 episodes to cover the assault on the royal palace. It's not a lot, but when you look at episodes 20 and 21, covering 8.5 chapters, I believe it's probably enough. As I mentioned earlier, the ideal area to expand upon is the fight as it pertains to chapter 604 and beyond. Clearly, a crazy fight is playing out inside the Cage of Life while Ichibei fights Yhwach, and I'd love to see at least some of it. As we've seen recently with Ichigo versus the Bambis and Byakuya versus Robert, Nanana and Candice, even if it's relatively short, the anime is capable of coming up with incredible, complex battle sequences, some of which even featured a litany of totally new abilities. If the Bambis can each receive full named movesets, then is it too much to ask to learn what Tenjiro's Kinpika actually does? Is there any chance we could see the Shikai of Senjumaru or Hikifune, especially since they both seem to wield their sealed Zanpakuto toe during the invasion? The crucial thing is and I don't think anyone, is asking for the world, because I appreciate there's a very limited amount of time and space. After all, these new battle scenes have to slot in around all of the content that previously exists from the source material. I don't expect we'll see any bankai, for example, and of course when it comes to the Schutzstaffel, I understand the need to keep their powers mostly a secret, since they'll be using them in full later on. That being said, both Askin and Leal have their shrifts revealed in this fight, so a basic version of each as something of a tease I think would work totally fine. More than anything, I want to feel that sense of desperation that lets you as the reader or viewer know that this is the single most important thing going down in the Bleach universe at the moment. We've waited years to see the Zero Division in action, and ever since the looming threat of Aizen, I'd imagined what it would be like to see someone invade the royal palace. While the slow burn build-up is nice and works really well, it's that moment of sheer terror that I want to see expanded on. That moment where Oetsu is taken out and the other members of the Royal Guard realise they might be in serious trouble, so they pull out all of the stops to try and hold this oppressive enemy back. At the same time, I want the Schutzstaffel to earn their victory. They returned to life and powered up through questionable means, so at least let them prove their worth. Hell, get Uryu involved too. Even if he never got the chance to reveal his power before the Sternritter in the Seirete, maybe he can here in the Royal Palace before the Schutzstaffel as he wipes out a member of the Zero Division. I want to see both sides engaged in a balanced struggle, abilities flying, even if the Zero Division are outmatched. Crucially, they at least need to be seen to be trying before they wind up dead. Upon their arrival, Kyoraku said that their combined strength is greater than that of the entire Gotei 13. Maybe the vast majority of that power is attributed to Ichibei, we don't know. But either way, I want the Zero Division to be given the chance to prove it. They deserve that much. Alright, but that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How excited are you to see the upcoming invasion of the Royal Palace, to see that battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel? Are you expecting it to be extended or expanded upon at all? And if so, what are you most hoping to see? What do you think is the most reasonable expectation for some kind of a new battle sequence? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts, so please do let me know down in the comments. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.